Hello, and welcome to The Things That Don't Change, where we endeavor to view an ever-changing world through the lens of eternity. I am Thomas Walheim. That is Christopher Hayden. So you can also call us
Hello.
Tommy and Chris. We don't really care. Um, but anyway, so we want to talk to you today about something that we talked about a couple of times on air, kind of briefly within another discussion. Something that we've talked a good bit about as friends. Um, and that is how we talk about the dead. Um, so, for those who are unfamiliar with the genetic fallacy, I know Chris, you are familiar with it, but the genetic fallacy is when you dismiss an idea because of the origin of the idea rather than on the merit of the idea, right? So my idea of don't speak ill of the dead, like that's a very old idea. Like it comes out of antiquity. You have who was it? Like Chilon, the Chilon of Sparta, I think was the first one that's it's normally attributed to. Um,
Sure.
and then um, and then uh you have I don't remember which Roman author, Diogenes Laertius, I believe it was, who like first attributed it to him in his writings, or at least that we have record of. He probably wasn't the
Yeah.
first, but um, but he has this idea of de mortuis nihil nisi bonum, like when speaking of the dead, say nothing if not good, and that came into the English vernacular as simply do not speak ill of the dead. It's like just a common more that spread throughout the Christian West, throughout from the 5th century BC up until now. It's been kind of lost. My idea of do not speak ill of the dead does not come from originally any like Catholic moral perspective. It doesn't come from any biblical thing that I read. My first exposure to that was Chandler Bing on the show Friends, saying that there was a scene where there was a he was watching a high speed chase, and then apparently the guy in the high speed chase ended up dying, and Monica goes, well, don't what like some moron thought he could make it all the way to Canada on half a tank of gas, and he's like, hey, do not speak ill of the dead, and that phrase stuck in my mind just because it sounded old. Like, don't speak ill of the dead.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, that's a proverb, I guess. But it stuck in my
Yeah.
mind. And so I have been turning this over in my mind for the last few years. Um, and there are times in which it's more pertinent. Like, God have mercy, we are recording this only a few days after the murder of Charlie Kirk, for instance, and the ways in which people are talking about him. There are some who are speaking about it very glowingly of him, and eulogizing him essentially, um, and but then there are the people who disagreed with him that are being quite nasty to him, and that's not what this episode is about. This isn't an episode about Charlie Kirk. Just an illustration of the point that there is something to having a tact and having a moral compass when it comes to how we talk about the dead, and not just the recently dead. Because in antiquity, this was an idea of the dead cannot defend themselves, so you don't speak ill of them, right?
Yeah.
Um, but from a moral perspective, it's even more than that, because it's a if we believe that there is life eternal, and we hope that everybody that dies has access to life eternal, and will be welcomed into um, the heavenly homeland, then they are still alive, which means and arguably they're more alive than we. So what gives us the right to gossip about them? Like, what gives us the right to
Yeah.
take away their good name? You know what I mean? So, um, you and I were talking about this off air, like a little bit, just to like intro
Mhm.
the topic. And you said that you wanted to talk about this because we talked about it a couple times. And you said you wanted to talk about it, and your springboard was you said like Taylor Marshall and Constantine, and I have no idea what that meant. So please enlighten me.
Yeah. So yeah, so I guess when I first started thinking about this in earnest a few weeks back, I have to give a bit of a shout out to Dr. Taylor Marshall, the Catholic YouTuber, very famous online, because I've been reading a book series of his that he read, a fiction series, which I wasn't aware he wrote fiction books. So when I found this, I was like, ooh, this is interesting. I really want to read this. So I think it's the Sword and Serpent series. It's a trilogy of historical fiction with like a little like fantasy-ish element thrown in there. Um, and basically, the premise of the book is it takes place during the Diocletian persecutions of the church, right? And it follows a character who's basically like supposed to be like Saint George. So it's basically a retelling of Saint George and the Dragon with some other stuff
Right.
thrown in, some Arthurian legend thrown in there. So basically, it's just this story of these characters, these Christian characters in this period of the church where there's just a lot of persecutions going on. The Diocletian persecution, specifically as many were, was like the gods weren't answering the Romans, and they were fretting as to why is Apollo not answering our sacrifices. So then the idea was like, well, maybe these Christians who refuse to sacrifice to our gods, maybe because that's dishonoring the gods and they feel disrespected, so the gods aren't talking to us. So we need to eradicate those Christians. We need to suppress that sect. So that's kind of the historical context as to where the story takes place. But one of the reason where Constantine comes into it is that one of the characters in this drama, both in real life and in the story, is Constantine, the son of Constantius Chlorus, who was one of the co-emperors. So little historical background as to
Please.
this period in history, because I can't help myself. So in the 200s in the Roman Empire was a period known as the crisis of the third century. Basically, from like 250-ish well, I guess like 230 to 280, somewhere around there, you basically had civil war after civil war. You'd have generals who would overthrow the emperor, declare themselves emperor. A couple of years later, they'd get deposed or killed. Another guy would declare himself emperor. Basically, the entire empire was just in chaos. You had a couple of breakaway Roman empires who were fighting each other. It was a mess. But then you had this guy Diocletian, who was a general who became emperor, and he instituted all these reforms to the whole system of Rome. He's the first guy who split it up into Eastern Rome and Western Rome, as it became into the Byzantine period. And basically he said, all right, I'm going to be the Augustus, the emperor of Eastern Rome, in Nicomedia in Anatolia. And then I'm going to declare one of my other generals, Maximian, as emperor of Western Rome in Mediolanum in Milan. That was his capital. So you had these two people, and then you also had co-emperors who would rule under them, who also had their own regions, right? So you had Galerius in the east, who was kind of in the Balkans, and then you had Constantius Chlorus in kind of like Gaul and Britannia, so kind of in the west. And Constantius Chlorus, his son was Constantine. Constantius Chlorus was kind of like the black sheep of the four, where they didn't trust him as much. So like Constantine was kind of kept in Diocletian's court as like a hostage of sorts.
Right.
He was raised kind of to be a tribune. He was a very successful general, but the means of why he was there weren't quite all the most rosy. So
Right.
you have Constantine, and he factors very much in Taylor Marshall's book. And like the way the book describes him, they shows him as like a very fair, very stern, yet very open man. Like while everyone around him is persecuting the Christians, he's not Christian, and it's unclear how much he's aware that everyone around him is Christian. Like all of his friends are Christian, like the main
Right.
character and like the kind of the protagonist. His mother, obviously Helena. But he's kind of open to that, and he respects people as opposed to like, oh well, you're this other religion, so I'm gonna persecute you like Diocletian, all them. So it shows him just as a very honest, kind of very strong man who a lot of people pay attention to. And this just got me thinking about the historical figure of Constantine. Because like again, he's such a pivotal figure in world history, Roman history, in the fact that he legalized he made Christianity like allowed to be celebrated. He didn't make it the official religion, but he legalized it, so it wasn't persecuted after his time.
It no longer had to be
And
secret.
like exactly,
Like
so like
the
it's
first
just
3 centuries of popes were all martyrs because
right,
like being pope just meant you are going to be killed. Like
yeah,
that's just the
because
reality.
yeah, like we need to hunt down Christians. So hey, there's this visible guy in Rome who we can go find and get his
Right.
head off. So let's go for him. Actually, in Saints of the Week, which I do on the YouTube channel, there's been a couple of Saint Popes from the crisis of the third century time that we've kind of discussed over the past couple of weeks. So if you're familiar, if you people have been paying attention to my Saints of the Week, then
What do you mean, you people?
you people. But anyway, Constantine. I'm getting ahead of myself, but or
You
behind
good.
myself. Anyway, So it just got me thinking, because with historical figures in general, I think Constantine's a prime example though, because there's so many people discuss why he did the things that he did, and oh well, he legalized Christianity because he sought that as his way to get power to become emperor, and it's like Constantine didn't need Christianity to take over the empire. He had already, Diocletian was gone, Maximian was gone. It was basically a war between Constantine and Maxentius, Maximian's son, and kind of a couple other factions. Constantine had the force of will and the army probably to win those battles if, given enough time. But he still decided to not only take up the cross as the symbol of his army, which, led him to a very great victory at Milvian Bridge, but also to basically give up his godhood, because the Roman emperor, the Augustus,
Right.
was God to them. That was, somebody who worshiped the emperor because he was a god. And the humility that somebody must have to say, no, you know what? I'm not God. There's another God. And I'm going to respect the authority of these other men who are representatives of that
Right.
religion. Like that's so revolutionary, and I refuse to accept that was just some power play on his part, some sort of cynical power play. Because that's
Yeah.
how it can be painted. But again, that just got me thinking. That so many people guess as to why he did what he did. But Taylor Marshall's book really makes me think about what was Constantine actually like. Because like the book takes a lot of liberties, with some of the history behind him. But what was Constantine like? Was he just, obviously he was just a regular man. Like how was he like towards his mother? Like they were pretty close. How was he like
Right.
towards the people around him, or how did he treat his army? Like who was Constantine the man? I'm less interested in Constantine the guy in my history book. What was Constantine the man like? And I think we just miss
Right.
that a lot. In the way that we understand history.
That kind of hits the nail on the head. The idea of I want to know Constantine the man rather than Constantine the character, because
Yeah.
I think particularly when it comes to historical figures, like when we think of the idea of don't speak ill of the dead, when we think of don't gossip about the dead, we are normally thinking in terms of, oh, my distant relative who died that no one liked, and or some public figure who died,
Yeah.
and you know like Pope Francis is a good example that a lot of people took issue with Pope Francis, and then when he passed there was a like, all right, well, time and place, is this the time to really go into um like all of our issues that we had but the thing is that one, public figures, but two, historical figures, we tend to, as we said before, view them more as a
Yeah.
caricature, as a figure, as a character, than we view them as a person.
Yeah, and
And
I mean, like I put in like the little bullet points we had, more like ink and facts on a page. That's really all they are to us. These people in
right,
our history books.
and only the
that
facts that are
one
convenient to the story that we're trying to tell.
exactly. Like Constantine's just that one bust. That one marble bust that you always see in all the pictures. That's all
Right.
Constantine is to us. Or something like that.
Yeah, but it's like, we have I think a good example in this concept. Well, before I go into examples, I'm actually going to just go into defining a couple terms. When we're talking about gossip, because this is kind of what this boils down to, is that like
Yeah.
speaking ill of the dead who cannot defend themselves is gossip. When we as Catholics talk about gossip, we mean one of two things. We mean backbiting, or we mean calumny. Calumny is when you are telling lies about somebody in a way that takes away their good name. So if I said that, like, oh, Chris Hayden is a terrible money launderer, which now that's on the internet, so now anytime someone uses AI to
Yeah, that's been
to
clipped.
ask about you, they're going to be like, oh, well, I heard a source say that he's a money launderer.
Yeah.
Like, that would take away your good name, right? But the other one is backbiting or detraction, which is when I tell a truth that I have no right to tell in a way that detracts from someone's good name. So it's like, if you said about me, oh, well, the thing about Tommy is that he's a wretched sinner and he curses too much, and yeah, those are true things. But Like, is there a context in which you can say that? Yeah, sure. Is there a context in which you ought not to say that? Like, particularly, like, let's say you're talking to like, I don't know, your cousin who's met me like twice,
Yeah.
and they go, so tell me about your friend Tommy. You go, well, he's got a mouth like a sailor, and like you start with that. It's like that is
Right.
now their entire image of me. That those
Yeah.
ink and facts, and only the facts that are convenient to the story. Once you condense someone to a few basic facts, well, now that's just they're a character, and these are their only
Yeah.
attributes in my head, right? So, one way that we've talked about many times, um, and you kind of touched on with the example of Taylor Marshall. I want to talk about like historical fiction, and then I want to talk
Hmm.
about just history generally.
Yeah.
So, so in terms of historical fiction, one of the examples that you brought up off air, which I think is a very good example, is the movie Pocahontas.
Right.
So Pocahontas is, don't get me wrong, it's a movie I enjoy. Like I enjoy this movie. It's a good movie. It is a weird movie to make. Like because Pocahontas, for those who are unfamiliar um with the history of Pocahontas, with the history of the Jamestown settlers, um there is in Pocahontas, in the movie Pocahontas, there is a single moment in that movie that is actually historical.
Yeah.
Like there is literally one moment, and that is she throws herself on top of John Smith to keep him from being bludgeoned to death. Um, and is that a great moment in history? Yes, it is.
Hmm.
Also, some scholars disagree on how actually true that was because the only account we have of it is from John Smith, and he was being a little fanciful in the way in which he was describing how he was treated by the natives. So like we don't even know if that's true. But
Yeah.
let's just say, okay, written record, there's a written record, this is a story, right?
Are you trying to
John
tell me the
Smith
talking
was
tree isn't true to history?
right. The talking
Grandmother
tree,
Willow's not real?
the right, the talking tree, um the clouds that shape like white men and Native Americans and then clash
Yeah.
together. There's a lot that just weirdly isn't real.
Yeah. The fantastic
Uh,
color palette in Colors of the Wind.
that's just America, baby.
Yeah, that's
But in any case, so like that is like the one thing written record, other than like a couple of names, that is okay. Yeah, there's a history of
right.
that. Um, like there is a history of John Smith. There's a history of Pocahontas. There's a history of Kocoum. There's a history of Governor Radcliffe. And this is where we get into really tricky territory.
Yeah.
John Radcliffe was just some guy. Like, he was just the guy in charge of that expedition. When all of this happened, he wasn't even there. Like, he just
Yeah.
saw them there, went back to England for a bit, came back. Like, he was just some guy. You could have made anybody the villain in this, but you chose to take someone's actual name who played an actual
Right.
role in this actual story, and you made them this hand-wringing, just sinister man.
Yeah. Mustache
And it's like,
twirling.
yeah, and it's like, to an entire like 3 or 4 generations of people, that is all that John Radcliffe is
Yeah.
oh, that guy who just absolutely hated the natives and just wanted to see them slaughtered, and
Mhm.
and was just greedy for gold because he had fallen out of favor with King James, which did not happen. And like all these things that just say you've turned him into a completely different person. Not just a matter of like, oh, you added a couple details that kind of like make his good name, put his good name in a precarious position. It's like, no, you've put him
Yeah.
in the position of you are now an entirely different person than you were to every onlooker, to most people who hear your name. You
Right.
know?
But and no one and we don't realize that.
Right. Like you could have done something I think a lot more responsible if you were to say, hey, that's a really great moment with Pocahontas throwing herself on top of John Smith. You could have said, all right, let's take that moment and say this was the inspiration for a story that we just made up with completely different characters.
Right.
Like and then you end up with a well, functionally Avatar. But it's
But
like
it would have come out before Avatar, so Avatar would have been based off that,
right.
as it is.
But it's like yeah, you have like movies tend to do this a lot when they try to involve like historical things. There are things that's like a you have things like The Chosen, right?
Yeah.
Um or let's say Dunkirk as another example. Like things that take something historical, but there are a lot of holes in the story, and so like not holes in a sense of like, oh, it doesn't make sense, holes in the sense of we don't know what happened in between these two events.
Right. Yeah.
You know? And so to make a movie, to make a TV series, you have to fill in those blanks. The Chosen, I think, does a very good job with this, that they fill in the
Hmm.
blanks, but specifically with things that it doesn't detract from or contradict the actual biblical stories.
Right, because they're going back to the source, and they're not just okay saying, okay, yeah, that's our source, and then we're doing our own thing over here. They're going back and saying, okay, this is our source. Let us analyze the source and understand it, and then based off of what we know of these people and these characters, we will then extrapolate what could have happened. You know,
Right.
so they're really engaged in the source to create their story,
Right.
which I feel
And
like Pocahontas didn't bother to do.
no,
Not that there's much
even
there
not
too.
even kind
Again,
of. Like,
yeah, I mean, you know.
yeah.
I couldn't imagine writing a historical fiction and not doing your due diligence. Like that's we've probably discussed this before, but that's just one of my pet
Yeah.
peeves is when there's blatant inaccuracies. Where it's just like if you googled it for 3 seconds,
Right.
you would have found out that no.
Right. The so I'll give a topical example when it comes to historical fiction, and that's that like 2 days ago, my wife and I went to see the Downton Abbey movie, and I said something that I have to repent to this, and I really do apologize for this. But I said something to her because I when we're watching a period piece, I'll normally like lean over to her and give her like, hey, here's a little historical context just to like
Hmm.
put this in perspective, because I'm just more into history than she is. And so I'm leaning over and I'm like, hey, just to put this in context, we're like in the middle of the Depression area. That's why they're talking about this. And she goes, oh, okay, right. And then
Yeah.
briefly, we have the Prince of Wales comes by, who will be Edward the Eighth,
Mm.
and I turned to her and I'll give a censored version of what I said. I said, "Oh, and that's Edward the Eighth. He is a piece of human garbage." Um, and she like laughs or whatever, and then I went, "Ah, I never say that about actual people. I say that about characters who are completely fictional. Like
Right.
you can say that you can say that you know the 13th Doctor in Doctor Who was a piece of garbage because he's an idea.
Right.
Like he's not an actual person. I'm not saying that or was 13th Doctor the woman? Jodie Whittaker was the yeah, she. But the
Only because she's a
but yeah,
woman.
I'm
I
not saying
get it.
Jodie Whittaker was
Yeah.
a piece of garbage. No, Jodie Whittaker is a human being imbued by God with an intrinsic dignity
Right.
as an image of him, right? But so is Edward the Eighth, who I
Yeah.
can say, and here's where I think where we need to like delineate what is gossip versus what is stating facts, like pertinent facts. I can say to, I can say as the Prince of Wales passes by in the Downton Abbey movie, I can point at him and say to Jess, "Oh, that's Edward the Eighth, or he will be Edward the Eighth. He was a garbage monarch. Like he was a terrible monarch."
Yeah.
Or I can say he was terrible for England. Like things like that. Those are historical facts. It's like this is just
Right.
the context historically of this person. But that's different from attacking his character. That's just like we were talking in a previous episode about the Romanovs, and I was saying like Nicholas II was a great man. He was a wonderful, God-fearing Christian man, and he was a
Hmm.
terrible monarch for Russia.
Yeah.
You know? Like, these two things are simultaneously true. It is not gossiping about me to say that I am terrible at billiards. I am terrible at billiards. Like, if you ever play billiards against me, you will win. It does not matter if you've ever played before. You will win. Like, I'm just not
Yeah.
good at it, and I'm okay with that. But that's different than saying, "Oh, he's a debauched philanderer" or something like that. That's attacking my very character, not just a particular application I had to a certain skill set. You know, um, saying that somebody wasn't good at their job isn't to say that they are not a
Right.
good person. It's not taking away their dignity as a person made in the image and likeness of God. You know, um,
Yeah.
so yeah, it would have been proper for me to say, "Oh, that's the Prince of Wales. He will become Edward the Eighth. Um, he was not a good monarch." And so you're probably going to hear them make a couple of jokes that are like alluding to that, things like that. But it's like that's different than saying this person, this actual person, this child of God was just a piece of garbage. You know,
Yeah.
like that's wrong to
Yeah.
say.
Yeah. I mean, it's tricky because I don't know, where does that leave us, I guess, with historical fiction? This is at the end of my bullet points, but we'll talk about it now because we're kind of on the topic already.
Yeah.
But like how do we handle that? Because like, for example, um, growing up for a long time, I was a big fan of the Assassin's Creed series, video games.
Right.
And Assassin's Creed series, which I really loved about it, was that it's still going on, but I don't play anymore because it's dumb now. But what I really loved about it was that you would have these video games, these adventure games that would take place in historical settings.
Right.
So like you'd be back in time with fictional, like your main fictional character and some fictional characters, but then you'd interact with like all these different historical figures, like Machiavelli,
Right.
or Benjamin Disraeli, in Victorian England, or Cleopatra, like all these different characters would just kind of show up. And it's just cool
Yeah.
to see that, cool to kind of be able to play a game in that period. But it gets tricky because, you have these characters and maybe they're side characters and they're just kind of how they are. But, like in some of the games, they're the primary antagonists, and again, I'm not saying they can't be, depending on who the person was, but like Rodrigo Borgia, Pope Alexander the Sixth is the main antagonist of the Assassin's Creed 2 and part of Brotherhood. But anyway, yeah, he wasn't a good pope. He was one of the Renaissance popes. He had a lot of children. So he's got a very controversial legacy. But now he's a villain in a timeline in a story where the whole premise is that like everyone's trying to get these alien artifacts, and the assassins and the Templars. The Templars are super evil. The assassins are the good guys, and they're trying to stop each other. Throughout history, and
Right.
religion probably doesn't exist, and he's just this evil mustache twirling villain. And it's like, okay,
Yeah.
he wasn't a great pope, or maybe he had some issues in his personal life, but like. Who are we to then denigrate him to such an evil level? That seems a bit wrong to me.
It is, and so here's a tricky thing. So like, and I'll give one more example. Dante, like,
Mm-hmm.
think about Dante. Like
Yeah.
like the Divine Comedy. You're not just saying, oh, this person had some trouble with sin in their earthly life. Like you are
Yeah.
talking about
They
the
are in
eternal
hell.
perdition of actual people. Like
Yeah.
like it is a, oh, and here's all the people I met in hell. Like it's like, oh, dang, okay. Like, and
Yeah.
that's, I bring that up as a pertinent example because I think that a lot of people in the uh booky Catholic space love Dante. Like,
Yeah.
and
I've never read Dante, so I can't speak to the Divine Comedy,
and
but
right, but um it's one of those things that it's like, what is the main effect that this has? Is this just because like we do dilute people a while after their death to just being figures, characters, they represent a thing, and so
yeah.
like, and so it is easy to say, okay, I'm just going to use this character as a representation of this vice because we all know
Mm.
that this person represented this vice. Um,
Yeah.
and so that just moves the story along because they're a pertinent example of something does that make it not gossip? No. And that's the nitty gritty of it, but it's an
Well,
important
it's a true
nitty
thing because
gritty.
it's also public
Like,
knowledge. You know,
right.
it's not like you're digging into the
Yes.
person, like their personal
Right.
files. It's like, no, this is just
Yeah.
something everyone knew. You know it. I know it. Everyone knows it. Believe me. You
Right.
know?
So like think of it this way. And there's some things that ought not to be public knowledge. Like that's another delineating
Yeah.
line. So someone's diary is published after their death. Like, should that have been a thing? I don't know.
I don't know.
Like,
Yeah.
there's some in which it's like, no, it makes sense for a diary to be published after the death, like the diary of Saint Faustina. She wrote that diary on the instruction of her superior to then be disseminated. You know,
Yeah.
it's like she knows that this is going to be public, like, or that it will be seen by others at least. And so, I'll give a dichotomy here. Alexandra Fyodorovna and Alexander Hamilton.
Yeah.
Both, common rumor is that they were unfaithful. They struggle with marital infidelity. But the difference is that Alexander Hamilton wrote a book about it.
Yeah, he did.
Like it's one thing to, whereas like we don't have any even historical evidence for the idea that Alexandra Fyodorovna was. No, she seemed like a good Christian woman. It's just a matter of that was the rumor mill in Russia at the time because people didn't like her and they didn't like Rasputin. And so they said like, okay, if Rasputin has her so wrapped around his finger, maybe it's because, and they started making up this story. It's like, that is terrible calumny to a person. Whereas like, yeah, you look at Giacomo Casanova is I think a great example. Giacomo Casanova, for those who don't know, this is where we get the term Casanova. Giacomo Casanova wrote the book L'Histoire de ma vie, which is the story of my life, and it is the book that made us shift our view of history to like, oh well, probably Renaissance Europe was more like this, and everyone was secretly sleeping with each other. They just didn't say it. And it's like, or maybe this guy was just a skank, you know?
Yeah.
Like, maybe this guy just was not the shining example of most Europeans, you know? But like the entire story is just the story of his life, which most of it revolves around his sexual escapades. And yeah, when you write a book and you're like, and here's all the women I've bedded and like all of the different weird sexual scenarios I've gotten myself in. First of all, did you? Like,
Yeah, right. Are you just bragging?
like-
you know, you just say, "Oh, look how cool I
like-
am."
yeah, when you write a book to talk about how fierce a sexual prowess you have, that makes me wonder, did you though? Like,
Yeah.
you seem a little insecure. You seem like you're overcompensating.
Yeah.
But also, it's like, yeah, this guy's writing an entire book about his sexual debauchery. So we can talk about his sexual debauchery. He is willingly sharing that with the world. You know? Like, it is
Yeah.
like, okay, well, now that has been outed, let's talk about it. That's the same thing as like if I were struggling financially, if my family were struggling financially, and I confided in you, and I said, hey, we're like really struggling to make ends meet, and then you said on this podcast, oh, well, it's like how you're talking about how like you guys are like really broke right now, like,
Yeah.
and it's like that is taking something said in confidence and making it public in a way that might make people look down on me, which is different than looking at the national debt.
Right.
Like, oh, a lot of people really mismanaged the country's finances, and now we have a national debt. That is public knowledge. And so we're just sort of talking about a fact. Like, the person actually is kind of ancillary to the fact, you know? And so it's not it's not denigrating to them. It's not taking away their good name. It's just sort of a like, all right, well, we all know the blank. So, given that, you know? It's like, it's like, okay, this will be a doozy of an example, but I'm going to go with it. Hitler.
No, of course. It always comes back to Hitler.
Yeah, so Hitler, there are many things that are well documented. This guy was not a great guy. You know,
Yeah.
this guy did some vile, evil things. An interesting thing about Hitler, by the way, and I do not say this in any way to excuse anything that was begotten by him or under his authority, but the interesting thing is that we tend to distill all of Nazism, all of the National Socialist movement, um, in Germany into Hitler. Like he
Hmm.
personally designed all of it.
Yeah.
And it's like, and that there's a reason for that, is that when you are in charge of something, you are responsible for it. You
Yeah.
know?
And when he came to power, he really kind of took all of that and then subsumed it into the cult of himself, really.
Right.
You know, he kind of
And
put himself at the center of it.
right. But like you think of people say like, oh well, Hitler killed 6 million Jews. Okay, 6 million Jews were killed under Hitler,
Yeah.
but I'm not saying that Hitler is in no way responsible. He is, in the same way that like if my daughter slaps someone across the face, I have to apologize. You
Yeah.
know? Because that's my daughter. I'm in charge of her. Like that's my responsibility. In the same way that like if you are the colonel and your lieutenant does something out of line, then you have to apologize to the general. Like
Yeah.
one of my subordinates did something wrong, and that is my responsibility. You know, you are accountable for that which is under your authority. But it's like I'm not saying that Hitler should be excused. I'm saying no, we need to broaden the blame of,
Yeah.
because there are some people like, because I think we view Hitler as like the embodiment of everything that was wrong in Nazi Germany, and it's like honestly like Himmler, Goring, Goebbels,
Yeah.
like those guys were probably personally more vile, like in their personal inclinations. And I don't think it's gossip to say that, because that's something that like no, they were outspoken about these inclinations, you know.
Right.
Um, but it's like we tend to just say, oh well, Hitler is the embodiment of all evil in Germany at the time, and so when we're making movies or writing books or making shows that involve Hitler, well, you can just slap anything on Hitler.
Hmm.
Hitler, he's the embodiment of evil. He's Satan, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, ooh, but he ain't. Like, we actually had to do our due diligence. What did he struggle with? So, like what sins, what vices was he given to, and what of that was known? So we can say, yeah, he was a fierce racist. We can say that he did not value human life. Can we say that he frequented brothels? No, because like that,
Yeah. There's no evidence for that.
right? But if you saw a movie in which like Hitler was at a brothel, you'd
You'd
be
be like,
like,
that makes sense, Hitler. You know, like that.
yeah,
That seems like
Hitler,
Hitler to
he's
me.
evil.
Yeah.
Like he does every sin all the time, and
Yeah.
it's like, yeah, no, you do actually have to do your due diligence. Like, okay, what is the person that I'm dealing with here? Not just like what is the character and what can I make them do, you know?
Right.
Um,
You know, like to. Do you have more on that?
no, go ahead,
No, I was just gonna take it out of Hitler a bit and go back to Hamilton.
go for it.
Turn the dial down a bit on the controversy. But yeah, no, because I mean, it's like adapting Alexander Hamilton,
Oh,
you
they
know,
have the
like
same
which
initials. That just occurred to me.
they do. That's true.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, you know, it's like adapting, you know, Alexander Hamilton's life. You know, like yes, he very publicly admitted that he had cheated on his wife with a very specific woman. But like, you know, like there's a lot of theories out there as to who else was he messing around with. Was he messing around with Angelica? You know,
Right.
his sister-in-law. I almost said mother-in-law.
Yeah.
You know, was he messing
Oh.
around with other women? Like I read the biography that the Hamilton the play is based off of, the one that
Right.
Lin-Manuel read, the Ron Chernow Hamilton biography. Very good biography. Like as biographies go, I haven't read many, but out of the ones that I have seen, that it's a very good one, very well detailed, very fair, paints a very well-rounded picture of Alexander Hamilton, the man. But the one thing that kind of bugged me about that the author didn't outright say it, but the things that are implied is
It's
just like they
alluded
say
to.
like, yeah, it's like,
Yeah.
oh, you know, Hamilton was known as a ladies' man.
Hmm.
Source on that, you know, like letter. It's like, okay, when he was
Right.
a kid, he was writing the daughter of one of his political allies because he was unmarried and she was unmarried, and he was courting her, and then that didn't work
Yeah.
out. So it's like, okay, so he was just a guy trying to court a woman, at
And
this point, and then
a ladies' man in what context? Because
right,
so I grew up in a very traditionalist Catholic group of kids, right? And there were some of us who were known as ladies' men, but those guys, that didn't even involve like kissing or hand holding, let alone sex. It was just a matter
right,
of they were effective flirts. Like they were good at the game of intrigue. They were good at the cat and mouse that made people interested in them. That made people want
right.
to be
And
with them.
Hamilton, if
And
anything, he was a very interesting guy.
he was an interesting fella.
out there. He was
very
loud. He was
charismatic.
exciting.
Yeah.
He had great ideas.
Yeah.
A great ideas and stuff. And it was just wow, Hamilton.
So
But,
I'll give
yeah.
one source, and I don't mean this as gossip, because I actually mean it in his defense. I think a large part of where people get the idea is what John Adams said about him, and
Yes.
and John Adams. I have gone on air several times to say John Adams is my favorite founding father. Like,
Yeah.
I cannot stand Thomas Jefferson for things that are absolute public facts about him that he very much advertised.
Yeah.
But I can't stand Thomas Jefferson. People hold him on such a pedestal. He was a jerk, and he was a well-spoken, well-written idiot. But the thing is that I like John Adams. John Adams, family man, good Christian man. Like he was an ineffectual president, and that's kind of the worst you can say about him most of the time, right?
Yeah.
But this is a little bit to his detriment. And in fairness, he said this privately in a letter to somebody else. And of course, well, they're dead now, and this is history. So we publish all the letters
Yeah.
between everybody. And, but John Adams said about Hamilton, and I quote, all right, apologies for the one naughty word in here, because I am quoting, but he said, there are not enough whores in all of New York to contain his superabundant secretions. Which is a hell of an insult. Like, if you're
There's
going
a
to
couple of
insult
founding
somebody,
fathers who
Yeah.
I could believe that about. Hamilton is not one of them.
right? But here's the thing: that's our source, and we say, oh, well, someone who personally knew him said that.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, someone who personally hated him said that.
Right.
Like someone who had a terrible inimical, like relationship of total animosity with him said that. Someone who was, even though they were in the same party, kind of a political rival of his, said that to a
Yeah.
friend. It's like yeah, what that like think of like when you were in high school, people who didn't like each other would say that each other was a skank all the time.
Yeah.
Just because they didn't like the way in which they acted. It's like, okay, we can maybe dismiss that as exaggeration in a personal discussion, still gossip on John Adams' parts and shame on him, but like it's okay, but we can't take that and run with it and be like, oh, okay, so Alexander Hamilton was just like a Casanova.
Right.
He was like
Yeah.
he just couldn't control himself. He was an animal. Like, it's like, yeah, we can talk about his affair with what was her first name? Something Reynolds.
Mariah Reynolds.
Yeah, Mariah Reynolds. Like, we talk about his affair with Mariah Reynolds because he published it. Like,
Yeah.
he's not trying to hide it. Maybe he should have. Like when
Dude
given
was
the
honest to a
choice,
fault.
yeah, when given the choice between like this is the end of my political career or this will really harm my family, well, you belong to your family before you belong to your country. Like
Yeah.
yeah, probably not the best. Probably not the best idea.
Not the most prudent, but
Yeah. But it's like, yeah, we could talk about things that are public knowledge that have been made public knowledge with the consent of the person. Like if, so for instance, like, I'm gonna give another example of someone who is yet living. So Terry Crews, like that Terry Crews.
Yeah.
He talks very openly, and praise be to God for it, he talks very openly about his struggle with pornography. and and um and he talks about like, and what I appreciate is like when people say, "Oh, I struggle with whatever the vice is," but let's say pornography or this. So it's like, I struggle with pornography. What do you mean by struggle? Do you mean
Yeah.
like, oh, I struggle with it in a sense of I just let myself do it all the time and but I feel bad, or you struggle against it, like you fight it.
Hmm.
You're making efforts, even if those efforts fail. Like Terry Crews, when he talks about his struggle with pornography, he's talking about struggling against pornography, which I appreciate. And it's important for him to talk about that because a lot of people look at him as this like very manly figure, and he's showing like, no, I need to be in tune with like my emotions and my vulnerability, and I need to make sure that I'm like doing right by my family. And he's like talking very openly about that
Yeah.
to promote that idea. Um, and it's like, if you talk about like, oh, well, like Terry Crews struggles with pornography, then yeah, he's openly advertising that. He's openly talking about that. He's making that public knowledge. Whereas if you say James Franco is a porn hoarder, I don't know that he is. I'm just saying like a
Just
random
saying that
name.
you're throwing that out there.
Like
ChatGPT now has that in its database
yes,
forever.
but it's like that. But like I can't say that because even if I
Yeah.
did have some inside knowledge of that, which I don't, like if I did have some inside baseball and I know that about him, well, I can't actually say that because
Yeah.
that would be going like he has not made that known. He has a right to a good name. That is the crux of all that um, that gossip is. In examinations of conscience over the last few centuries, at least, I've only looked at the ones in English, so over the last few centuries at least. Um, but examinations of conscience typically put gossip under "thou shalt not kill."
Yeah.
because a person has a right to their good name, and gossiping is killing their good name. It cannot be revived. Like in the same way that once you throw a grenade at somebody and it blows up, you can't unblow it up. In the same way, once you put a fact into the public psyche about this person, that fact or idea, even if it isn't a fact, it can't be taken back in. Now that's just the people's perception of that person, you know?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, and it's tough. Like, it's not easy. I understand that. We all, I think, struggle with that, especially nowadays when there's the internet and so much going on around out there. It's very easy to start attributing motive to people, or claiming that you know something, or there's this rumor going around. So yeah, it's something like you mentioned pornography. It's something we should be actively fighting against. Because I
Yeah.
think that is another major sin kind of our time.
Yeah. Ooh, that brings up another thing that I meant to bring up into this conversation. I completely forgot to, so
Yeah.
thank you. Okay. You and I talked about this before. Um,
Hmm.
the importance of viewing history through the eyes of those who experienced it,
Right.
not solely through the eyes of the modern sensibility.
Yeah, because
Um,
there's nothing that frustrates me more as a historical fiction work of art that's so painfully modern.
yeah,
In just the way the
yeah,
characters interact, or
right,
oh, we're super inclusive now, and we're
right,
against all the dumb stuff of the time, or something like that.
right.
It's
Like
frustrating.
you're watching something in um, you're watching something in like 17th century Spain,
Yeah.
and and there's like a gay character who is in an openly gay relationship, and they go like, oh well, who are we to judge? Like, and it's like okay, well, this was 17th century
Yeah.
Spain. Like,
Right.
and so in any case, you have so I'm going to give an example because this came up in a conversation between us because somebody was talking about Dennis Prager, and
Mm.
and um, because I don't know if there's any actual like truth to this, but they were saying that the Trump administration wanted to take away funding from PBS and instead pour it into PragerU, and and they were advertising like these people were showing like, oh, well, we're going to instead fund an organization that says that slavery wasn't a big deal. And they
Yeah.
show this clip of this kid show in which they say, at the time, to most people, and it's talking about like 500 years ago, it's saying at the time, to most people, slavery was not considered to be a big deal. It wasn't in the public consciousness at the time like what an issue this was, and that is true. Like, and is it saying slavery is not a big deal? No, it's not saying that. Should it maybe say like on top of that? And I don't know if it did. I haven't watched the full video, but like, should it clarify that yes, slavery is a big deal and it's a terrible crime against humanity? Yeah,
Yeah.
but what is it saying? It's saying that are you going to judge a historical figure because they did not publicly denounce slavery? And it's saying, well, in the eyes of most people at the time, this was considered to be not a big deal. And this is where this connects to what you were saying. The best way I can think of to describe that, you and I were both born in the 90s. Which means that we were children during like the real dawn of the internet, when the internet became like a normal thing in homes, was like during our childhood. Yeah. It's completely unfettered at the time. Like no one knows how to use it, how to harness it, how to keep it within bounds. It's what AI is right now. No one knows what to do with it. No one knows the guardrails or how to implement them. And a lot of well-meaning parents, and good for them, would say like, okay, well, I'm going to get some like software that keeps the internet clean for my kid. But here's the thing. No one understands the totality of the internet. And so that software can have the best intentions, and yet there are ways around it. There are things that it just doesn't cover, right? And so pornography, internet pornography is booming. Pornography up to this point was maybe there was a film that you went to see in a theater with actual other people.
Right.
Like,
or you gotta go down to the store and
right, or I
pay
gotta
for
go down to
something
the
with
store
your
and,
money.
like, check it out with somebody. Hey, can I take this VHS home? Like that's the evolution. Now it's like, oh, you mean I can just access this in my bedroom by myself with no one else needing to know? Wow.
Yeah.
And so internet pornography, boom, huge thing, right? And so that was a terrible time for humanity, particularly because we didn't even know like if we are going to allow this. But if we're going to allow, let's just grant that for a second because we did. It's like, okay, if we're going to allow internet pornography, then we don't know how to say what is allowed and what's not allowed. And so it's just a Rule 34. We're just going to go for it. We're going to make porn out of everything. Every deviant fantasy you could have, there's a market. Like every prurient desire in a person is a potential market. And so we start putting a bunch of stuff out there. Now, in this age right now, all of a sudden we're seeing a bunch of stuff pulled off of porn sites because they're realizing legal liability. They're realizing, oh, well, we can't verify that this wasn't rape. We can't verify that this person was of age. We can't verify that this person, like, there's a lot of things that are like, we just don't know. And there's no way for us to know. And so there's just reel it back in. And so, for context, slavery is a terrible thing. When we say that, okay, but at the time, people thought it was no big deal. At the time, when you were like a teenage boy and you were struggling, or teenage girl for that matter, but I wasn't. When you're a teenage boy and you say that you struggle with pornography and you like confide in someone about that, they go like, oh, everybody struggles with that. It's not a big deal. And so it's treated as not a big deal. And so people 200 years from now will look at our generation as the generation who willingly watched videos of people getting raped for their own pleasure.
Yeah.
Right?
That's a very stark way to put it, but that's true. Yeah.
It's absolutely true. It's this is something that like so many people in our generation partook in this and now have to heal from that, and it's a terrible thing. But it's like by the time we were all told it's not a big deal, don't feel too bad about it, and it's like this is a huge deal. Like this is terrible This is like
Yeah.
eroding away at the things that make society cohesive, and
Right. I mean,
and
abortion's another
it's
example.
eroding
You
away
know,
at the dignity of the person. What's that?
no, say abortion's another example. You know, like yeah,
Yeah,
and when in the future will people turn around and be like, wait, they did what to babies in the womb? Like that's insane,
right.
and it is insane. But again, but that's something that we're struggling with in this era.
Right. And it's not just a matter of like, like back in the day, abortion was a thing, but it was something that like had to be done secretly. Like we don't
Yeah.
advertise this, you know? And so is it like, okay, but now we come from the generation, one of several generations, unfortunately, because this started in the 70s, but we come from the generation where where abortion went from being what was it uh
Safe, legal, and rare.
safe, legal, and rare. Yeah, abortion went from, well, it needs to be safe, legal, and rare to it now has to be celebrated. It now has to be
Yeah.
normalized. It now has to be like, well, this is a right of everybody, and like it's heinous. Now you have the people talking about how like, oh, we need to shout our abortions or whatever so that we can normalize it in society. It's not a big deal. Like
Hmm.
it's that same thing that like, yeah, we all do that. The human nature really hasn't changed ever.
Right.
And so it's like there are all these things that are the main vice of the time that is considered to be not a big deal, you know? Um
Yeah.
so yeah, you actually can look at somebody and say like, yeah, well they weren't publicly denouncing slavery at the time, and so um and so they're dead to me. And it's like, no, you actually can look at them and say like, well, at the time, everyone treated that as normal, even if they didn't admire it. Like, plenty of people in like the 90s and aughts would say like, I mean, I'm not proud of my porn habit, but like it's normal. Like every guy
Right.
deals with that, you know? And
Yeah.
so like it's that same sort of thing. It's a like, no, you come into a sudden consciousness of where you lose the cognitive dissonance, but you can't then say, oh well, this person was a terrible person because they weren't uh, publicly denouncing or disavowing this immoral
Right.
behavior. Well, no, it's just they weren't really made aware of it. It was treated as normal for most people.
Yeah.
Like
And the
that's
people who were
just
back then and they were saying things about it, yeah, good for them.
good
Like
for them. Absolutely.
like we had a saint a week or two ago. I can't remember his name now. But he was a Jesuit who went to the colonies, to minister. And when he got there, slavery was a very new institution, but it was everywhere. I mean, like
Yeah.
the popes up to that point had said, don't do that. But then the Spanish
I'm
were
going to
like,
clarify. I'm going to
free
clarify one
labor.
thing. The slave trade was a new institution. Slavery was a very old institution.
Yeah, no, I mean like the
Yeah.
specific form of slavery that we became familiar with later on here in America.
Yes.
Chattel slavery, that whole awful thing. But
Right.
anyway, so this saint, goes to Cartagena, in Colombia, which at the time was, the New Granada, and he starts ministering to the slaves and basically preaching to them their dignity as humans when they're being treated as less than human. So like yeah, we have
Right.
heroes like that. We have people like that who do advocate for it back in their time, but the entire society as a whole, to them that's just what happens.
Yeah.
They're desensitized to it, or they just don't see that in the same way that we can now looking back. And sure, you can call out the worst of those, the people who were like being awful to their slaves or perpetuating that, but at the same time, you can't necessarily like then go demonize like every Joe on the street, who's just a guy back in the time, and it's like, oh well, that's just not a big deal,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. No, absolutely. And like slavery is an interesting thing because like as an example, it's an interesting thing because slavery has taken many different forms.
Yeah.
Here in the United States, and just like hear me out on this, like here in the United States, we are obsessed with race And I don't think that's unnatural. It's just that we are a country, not the only country, but we are a country that we are a mixture of peoples. And
Yeah.
that is not true across most of the world. Like, who lives in most of Africa? Africans. Who lives in
Yeah.
most of Latin America? Latin Americans. Who lives in most of Asia? Asians. Who lives in the US? Everybody. Who lives in
Right.
Canada? Everybody. Who lives in the UK? Everybody. Like, who lives in Norway? Norwegians. Like,
Yeah.
it's like, but there are a few countries where it's just like, yeah, we are a melting pot. We're a salad, however you want to look at it. Like, we are a mixture of peoples. And so everything tends to be viewed along racial lines. Particularly, the slave trade within the United States was primarily a racial divide.
Mhm.
You know, like it was people were brought over from Africa, and then they and their descendants are slaves, chattel. It's a terrible thing that was publicly denounced by the magisterium at the time. The Pope, had several times, several popes denounced it, and in fact, the only slaves that were returned to Africa were returned because the Pope said, "I will excommunicate all of you if you do not bring these slaves back." And I
Yeah.
believe the Spanish slave traders at the time were like, "Oh, we don't want to be in the, we don't want to be in the." I keep wanting to say the bad graces of, but there's no such thing as bad graces. The bad vices. I don't know. But
Yeah.
we don't want to be in a
You don't want
precarious
all those bad
situation with the Pope.
vibes.
Yeah, and so a lot of slaves are returned to Africa. Not nearly enough, but because there were
Yeah.
Catholic slave traders who were threatened with excommunication and anathematization if they did not return the people to their native land. Now, here's the thing: most slavery throughout history wasn't really along racial lines. So, for instance, Korea has the longest unbroken streak of slavery in the history of any civilization ever. It was like 1,500 years long. But who's being enslaved in Korea? Koreans. And so, like, we don't think of it
Yeah.
as being the same thing. We don't think of it as being
Right.
like, oh, this people and this people are like, these people are subjugating these people in a way. You know, it's like, no,
Yeah.
it's just a
And I
class
mean,
difference. Like,
right. And there's, even in the Roman world, there's a lot of, a lot of the slaves of that time were people who were down on their lucks. They're like, yeah, I'll
right,
bind myself to work for you to kind of
right.
get back on my feet a bit, you know?
And this is, I think, a good place. This is not really on topic, but I think it's a good opportunity to talk about, like, people always talk about, like, why does the Bible not denounce slavery? Because it just talks about how do you treat your slave. And so, like,
Yeah.
because slave has meant many things throughout history. The chattel slavery that we're talking about in the United States and other Western civilizations is not the same thing as they're talking about. Because I will give you an example of a character that, under many old definitions of slavery, would be qualified as a slave, and that's Chewbacca. Chewbacca from Star
Hmm.
Wars. Canonically, or at least it used to be canonically, I don't know what the canon is anymore, but it used to be canonically. The reason why Chewbacca was following Han Solo around and doing all these things for him is because he owed him a life debt. Like, Han Solo saved his life, and so he said, "I owe you my life," and so he said, "I'm yours, whatever you need." And
Yeah.
that was a common form of slavery. Or all right, I'm not able to make ends meet, but if I can go to a wealthy person and say, "Hey, I will sign myself over to you as a servant for whatever your needs may be, if you give my family, uh, you know, quarters in food,
Hmm.
like, not pay, just quarters in food." That was a common form of slavery. Throughout some civilizations, were those quarters great? Was that food great? No, it was enough to keep you alive
Right.
because we needed you to go till the field or whatever. Um, and that's where the idea of the treatment of the slave comes in. Is that there are many cases throughout history in which slavery it wasn't an intrinsically evil institution. It was because it wasn't the chattel slavery. It was just I owe this person a debt, and so I'm going to pay off this debt this way, right? And so that's how it comes into play. Is they like, okay, if this is just a person that is saying, "I will work for you, whatever your needs may be, as long as you give me and my family quarters and food. Well, then the difference is going to be the quarters have to be dignified quarters, and the food has to be food worthy of a human. Like,
Yeah.
you can't treat this person as less than human. And that is where the African slave trade categorizes. It's a like, oh, this is a form of slavery that took away the humanity of people, or tried to take away the humanity of people, rather. It was a, we're treating these people as less than how we would treat any other human being
Right.
because, well, they're just slaves, you know?
Yeah. And a lot of
Um,
the theories of race, as we understand them now, came out of that kind of view of the world. You know,
right.
that, oh, well, now we have these people who are clearly a lesser form of thing. You know, they're not seeing them even as human in many cases. And yeah,
Yeah.
then you get all the racist theories, and that's a whole 19th century
Yeah.
um, kind of worms we don't need to get into.
So, all right. So what is the treatment here? Like as we go forward, as we're talking about like viewing history properly and viewing historical people properly and not gossiping about them. What do we change in our behavior? What edits can we make to
Mm.
go about our life a little more morally, a little more properly?
Yeah, I mean, well, we definitely need to be more discerning when we take a historical time period, historical people, and say, hey, we're going to make a story about them. You know,
Yeah.
so like if you're going to make a story about, say, um, British Prime Minister Benjamin Disraeli, because I'm reading a biography about him, so he's just on my mind. If you're
Okay.
making a story about him, you should have read a biography about. You know, like the Wikipedia treatment or the Google treatment's not going to be enough, because
Right.
you know you're gonna get inaccuracies. So I'd say that. Um, what else? I guess just making sure that you also just have an understanding of the time period itself, and just the general way people think, way the society moves, the priorities, the you know I don't know, but that I'm trying to say
Right.
that.
Yeah, you had to look at for the period was this person a
Yeah,
moral person rather than,
right,
you know, according to what the priorities are right now, was this person a moral person?
right.
Um, so the
And not everybody in a historical piece should sound like a modern Californian liberal, because that does take you out of it.
it does, doesn't it? The so I think one last interesting thing to think about is we were talking about the idea of a historical figure enters into the public psyche as a representation of a thing that they did a lot of the time.
Right.
So I'm going to give an example of someone that we literally know nothing about other than his name. Like at that point, how like are we talking about a person or are we talking about an idea? Because I'm talking about Ozymandias.
Mm.
Ozymandias, the poem goes, the guy finds a statue that is just the feet of what used to be a statue and a placard at the bottom that says, I am Ozymandias, king of kings. Look on my works, all ye mighty, and despair. And the whole point is, who the hell is this guy?
Right.
Like, never heard of him. Like, he thought himself so high and mighty, the king of kings. Like, a title that we only give to Christ. like,
Hmm.
like, this guy is putting himself on a god pedestal. And yet we have no idea who he was.
Yeah.
And so, can you do anything you want with the character of Ozymandias? If you involve Ozymandias in a story, isn't anything gossip? Because we don't know anything about him? Like,
Yeah. I'd say at that point you just create something in a time period and be like, yeah, this is based off the idea of that
right.
plaque.
And this also goes into the the Assassin's Creed thing. I forgot to answer
Yeah.
that, so I'm going to do it now at the very end. Um, but Assassin's Creed is a good example because they like, okay, we're coming across these historical figures, and here's who they are, like represented to be.
Yeah.
The tricky thing with that is that you could say, all right, well, this is an alternate universe in which this person was like this. But the tricky thing is, okay, but to most people who aren't doing their research and reading the books on these people, this
Right.
is going to be their only view of this person.
Yeah.
Like,
You got to treat him with some respect and deference.
right. And so there is a degree to which you can just say, yeah, in an alternate universe, this is how this person is, you know? But there's a degree to which, like, if you make them a caricature, then to the people who consume your media, they will be a caricature, you
Yeah.
know? Like, in the same way that, like, there are many people that their first real encounter with a person of Jesus, not the person Jesus, a person named Jesus, um, was with the Last Temptation of Christ. Willem Dafoe. Willem
Hmm.
Dafoe with a very interesting career of playing the devil multiple times and Christ at least once. Um, but
Interesting.
um, but in the Last Temptation of Christ, he's just some guy. Like, we're not really focusing on the divinity. He's a figure, and he's just growing impatient and just wants to be done with the world. He just hates everything, and it's like, if that is your impression of Christ coming out of this movie, the thing, or at least even if you have been a Christian your entire life, there are probably many people who went to that movie and then lost a lot of the Christianity because the most vivid image of Christ in their head now was the first time they had seen him put to film.
Right.
And oh well, he seems relatable, too relatable, you know?
Yeah.
Like, and so like that's it's a very tricky balance, and I don't envy the screenwriters who are trying to portray historical characters, but it is a grand undertaking. It is a grand responsibility. You are taking a
Yeah.
person's name, you are taking a person's dignity, you are taking many people's dignities into your hands, you know? Like,
Yeah.
how
I
do you
mean, we
portray
mentioned The Chosen.
Saint Thomas the Apostle? Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Like, how do you portray Judas? How do you portray Thomas the Apostle? How do you portray the betrayal of Peter? Because you have to give a backstory to that to make it make sense. Why are they afraid? Why do they act this way? And yet, whew, okay, I'm taking on the responsibility of I'm making this person's betrayal of Christ make sense and giving a backstory to it, a backstory I don't know. How do I do that
Yeah.
without without gossiping about these
Right.
people?
But again,
Like,
that's why you would do the research and really sit in that, sit in
right,
the headspace of that person. And it's almost kind of like character acting, I guess, in a way.
right,
Or, I mean, again, these are screenwriters we're talking about, or novelists or whatever, and they write characters, so they understand it. That's kind of part of it, that you get into the headspace of the character. So you just need to have a very keen sense of that, but also be aware that this isn't a character you're creating.
right.
It's a character who exists. So there's a little less of you that you're throwing into that.
Right. And there's also a lot can be achieved by a good preface or disclaimer.
Yeah.
Like, if you say, "Hey, we had to take some creative liberties with this. Many of the character motivations are are fictional to support the actual story. We don't know what actually happened. We encourage you to read the source material. We encourage you to go read the Gospels."
Yeah, like
Like,
Assassin's Creed and their pop-up before every game. This is made by a diverse team of different sexual orientations, backgrounds, religions, whatever.
right.
This is a work of fiction. I was like, okay,
Yeah, but like you'll
boy,
hear
can you miss?
you'll hear me do this often, and maybe it's not enough. But I'll say something like I'll be telling something from history, and I'll go, okay, this is a gross oversimplification of history. Do your own research, and it's like that is true. Like because I don't want to misrepresent something or characterize something in someone's head or someone, but there's also the trick of, but who's to say they are going to do their own research? They can
Yeah,
say, I heard some guy on the internet say that basically here's what happened, you know?
right.
And so, like, I think there is a point to preface. There is a point to qualifying or disqualifying your statement. To saying, like, I'll bring up the example of Pope Francis again. When I'm talking about Pope Francis, if I take issue with something that he did, um, uh, administratively in the church, or I'm talking about something that he said that was in some way causing confusion within or without the church, then is it better for me to say, all right, well, Pope Francis was just a confusing pope, and honestly, I don't think he ever should have been pope, and blah blah. It's like is it better for me to say that, which by the way is not true. But well, yeah, he was confusing, but like, um, but is it better for me to say that, or is it better for me to say like, listen, far be it from me to speak ill of the Holy Father, God rest his soul, but there are some things within his pontificate that, by his fault or not, were, lending confusion to the public discourse about Catholic teaching.
Yeah.
Being careful in the way in which you talk about those who can no longer defend themselves.
Right.
Is saying, hey, I'm going to put this in a way that, like, it's not putting them in a position of they have to defend themselves against an accusation. It is I'm speaking a fact about what happened around this person, and I'm not going to place blame.
Yeah. You're giving them all the charity that, they deserve as a person.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And obviously that's all we can do with both those who are living, the church militant, and those who have passed. And we hope are living as the church triumphant. Like, both of those, all we can do is say, like, well, we had to speak about them with charity. In all things, we need to go about our lives with the three theological virtues of faith, hope, and charity. So, yeah. I think that's a good place to end it. Theological virtues.
Sounds good to me.
All right. Yeah. Glory to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit.
As was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen.
Amen. Yeah, Father, Son, the Holy Spirit. Amen. Go be holy,
Amen.
everybody.